We were looking at these scriptures and, spending some time just kind of going through them. And quite often I like to take a verse and go back to the original Hebrew in its entirety and spend time, closely scrutinizing the verse. And a verse came up in Numbers 13, and I was sitting there next to Brad Huckins, my co-editor, and I said, Brad, look closely at that verse. There's an anomaly there in that verse. And we looked, and sure enough, the anomaly was present. And it was an anomaly that's consistent with what we're going to find in Genesis 6. Now, what's so interesting about this passage is that this passage has some secrets in it that once we start unlocking what's there, I mean, this verse has been around forever. But once we start unlocking what's actually there in the Hebrew, we're going to find some surprises, stuff that we've taken for granted in these verses over the years, where we've looked and said, well, the English makes it pretty clear that these were, mighty men of ancient times and so forth. And therefore, we should be able to accept that. And then we can go back and construe this as the sons of Seth. I want to take an objective look tonight and see if we can support that hypothesis, that in fact these verses in Genesis 6, 1 through 4 support the idea that these were the sons of Seth or something else. And when we get towards the end of the show, we're going to be talking about how this applies today. There is an application today, and I'll tell you, from my point of view, it's downright terrifying. But first of all, we have to start with the premise, and I think you and I can both accept, and I think most of our listeners will accept, that there are giants described in the redacted version of the Bible that most people have, in their house. And that redacted version of the Bible will talk about Goliath, being the sefer called Goliath Gath, Goliath and his brothers described as having, 6 fingers, double rows of teeth. And of course, there's Og of Bashan, and the Rephaim are discussed all throughout the book of Isaiah. And you have discussions of the giants who were in the land at the time that the spies came to spy it out. There's a raft of discussion about giants being in the land, and in particular, there is discussion about the size of Goliath and the size of Og of Bashan. So Goliath, by modern reckoning, would be somewhere between 13 and 15 feet tall, and Og of Bashan closer to 18 feet tall. So when you see these giants that are this size, when you're talking about a 13-foot man, it's not like you're talking about Wilt Chamberlain, only twice as tall, but no wider, right? Still the same skinny guy, but with long, spindly legs. No, that isn't it at all. You're talking about proportional beings. A human being that's 13 feet tall and is maybe 3,500 or 4,000 pounds. Big people. And as our slideshow tonight is going to show, here's an archaeological reference here that the photo shows a being that is about twice as tall as the other human beings that this giant is putting to death here on this particular paleoglyph that we see here. And so when we look at these kinds of things, there is a record, there is a substantial biblical record that talk about giants. And so there's some questions we have for those who say, and there are many churches, believe me, in this country who say, you cannot raise the issue of the fallen watchers in Enoch or discuss this giving birth to giants from something like these fallen watchers at all in our church. We're not going to listen to it. We're not going to tolerate it. We don't care what your scriptural support is. Just shut it and get out of the building, right? Now, I think that's kind of a closed-minded view. But we do want to look at these scriptures and see if they support this Sethite dynasty concept that somehow these kids of Seth were the ones that were taking the beef growth hormone and ended up, twice as tall as all their brethren. I don't think that's possible. And when we looked closely at this passage here, these passages in Genesis 6, there are clues that we can find in the Hebrew that are going to be most disturbing. And so I want to unfold some of those